Alrighty. So this week you guys are working on a discussion on a survey. So you are designing your own survey, and that was due yesterday at midnight. And then tomorrow you will be replying back to your peer post. So make sure you at least reply to 2 of your classmates. You can do more for extra points if you want it. And then you are also working on chapter 2 assignments in my stat lab. And then for Saturday, you guys are working on a assignment, which is the US candy production assignment. And since chapter 2, talks about frequency distribution and charts and graphs, that's kind of what our assignment for this week is based on. So if you go under your content for week 2, again, remember each week you have your reading and viewing assignments. So under the reading, you will find the textbook link, handouts, and under the viewing, you will find videos that I have created. So that can come in handy. Okay, so like I said, you are working on the discussion post by creating your own survey. You have to come up with your own questions. Choose a topic, what you would do for your topic as a survey, and then come up with a minimum of 3 questions, but depending on your topic, you can definitely do more. And then of course, we get into defining who your audience would be. Basically, who would you be sending this survey to? So you're defining your population, and then from the population you would be selecting your sample. And anytime we talk about any kind of survey, there can be biases and confounding variables that can show up. It can be intentionally or unintentionally, so trying to identify all of that. So even if you were not able to get that post done by yesterday midnight, you can do it today. You will lose point for not being on time, but at least you don't end up with a complete zero for the assignment. So even if you didn't get the first initial post done, try and get it done today, and then by Thursday midnight you would be doing your peer replies. So please keep that in mind. Now for the assignment, like I said, we're going to be working on frequency distributions and charts. So this is going to be your data set that you are working on. So if you open that up, you can see that's going to be your just a list of what is the industrial production, based as a percentage for US candy production. So you can see it starts in January of 1972 and it goes all the way to 2017, I believe. So it goes into August 2017, but normally we try to stick to, an entire year. So we go from January to December, so technically till 2016. So each one of you has been assigned 2 years, and you can see what years are assigned to you. So make sure when you're working on this assignment, you are copying down the years assigned to you. Don't do your calculations based on incorrect years, because otherwise I can't really grade you if you don't select the years that were assigned to you. So as you can see, we're starting from 2003 till 2016. So 2 years, pick what you have. And on this same file, you will see the second sheet is actually the template where you guys will be, entering your answers in. Now you can make a copy of this file or download it. So just go under the file option here and you can make a copy if you want to continue working in Google Sheets. If you want to download it as a Microsoft Excel file, then you can do that also. Now, as I understand with Microsoft Excel, when you're trying to submit this assignment, at the bottom over here, it will let you upload the file. But if it's Google Sheets, then sometimes it doesn't let you upload it. So if that happens with Google Sheets, that it's not letting you upload it, just go under Share and copy your link. And then you can actually just in the submission part, you can actually just submit the link to me. So if the Google Sheets doesn't let you upload it, just share the link with me, and that will work as well. So what I want you guys to do is actually work with me simultaneously. So that way, if you have any questions, you run into any problems, we can work on it together. So just go to that first data sheet over here and copy the data that you are working on based on the years assigned to you. So I'll show you that one more time, the years that are assigned. And at least the initial part of the worksheet, we can work on this together. So that way you guys know what to do. And then since you guys are going all the way down to 2016, I will pick 2 years prior to 2003. So that way I'm not, taking up anybody's data. And in this case, you just need the industrial production number. So I guess I can start at 2001 and 2002. So I'm just going to do, copy and paste. So I'm going to copy the data from the first sheet. And then when I come to my template, I can just paste it. So I will have my 2 years worth of data. So you can see I went from 2001. So January of 2001 to December of 2012. And that should be very similar to what you guys will be doing with your assigned years. Now, does anybody know how we can find the lowest data value from our set over here? So, try and find the lowest data value from our production. If you guys are familiar with Excel and different functions, then that knowledge might come in handy. So I'll show you 2 different ways that you can do this. I'm just copying the data over a new sheet. Google is kind of funny about this. If I try to sort out come on. So if I try to sort this list out, if I wanted to put it in order from smallest to largest, Google actually sorts out the entire page, the entire sheet. Now, Microsoft Excel will not do that, but Google does. So that's the reason why I'm copying it over on just a blank sheet. So that way I'm not messing up the template. And then when I sort it, just go from A to Z, which would be from smallest to largest, you will see it puts it in order. So then you can identify what your lowest data value is and what the largest data value is. So you can do it that way. Or if you want to use a built-in function, that's the minimum function in Excel or Google Sheets. So just use the minimum function and then select your production column. So all 24 of those values. And you can see it will pick the lowest data value. And we know that's 102 because when we sorted it over here, it was 102. So either one of those ways is fine. So what do you think for the highest data value the function would be?
Max?
Yeah, exactly. So very simple functions that you need to work with to find the minimum and the maximum values. Now, this is going to be, anytime you are trying to create a frequency distribution table, even if you were doing this by hand, in the traditional way, you would still need to start out by finding your lowest data value, your highest data value. Then you find the range, which is what we're getting ready to do that. Because the first thing you actually do is you figure out what the width of your frequency distribution column is going to be. Now, there's different ways that you can work with a frequency distribution. We are going to be creating classes because you have numbers that are varied enough that each number cannot be a class of its own. And you will see those both types of examples in your notes. So in this case, since we are going to be creating classes, we have to figure out what that width is going to be for our class. So that's kind of what we're working on right now. So we started with our highest and lowest data values. Now, does anybody know how we calculate the range for any data set? Have you guys had a chance to look through your notes for chapter 2 yet? So the range is what we call as a measure of dispersion, and you guys will actually see that definition again in chapter 3 when we get into measures of central tendency, which is, your averages, mean, median, mode, and then we will get into range, variation, and standard deviation. So in chapter 3, you'll be talking about this again, but we do introduce the concept of range here in chapter 2. So range is basically, we want to know how far apart our numbers are spread out. So it's just a measure of a spread, how far your numbers are spread out. So this is a very simple calculation. You are basically taking the largest data value and subtracting the smallest data value from it. So take and I just click on the cells and let Excel do the calculation for me. So I'm just going to click on the cell where we have our largest data value and subtract our lowest data value from it. And of course, you can see that's going to come out to be 28. So, again, using the built-in functions to make our calculations a lot simpler. And that's kind of why you are using Excel or Google Sheets. So the idea is you can get comfortable with the program also, and then, not have to do all the calculations by hand. So we've got our range. Now, as far as the number of classes go, and you will see this in your instructions over here. Yeah, so right there, part B, where it's saying decide on the number of classes and how did you choose this number. So if you look at your notes, basically we say your number of classes can go anywhere from 5 to 20, 5 being the smallest number. So this is kind of where the trial and error part of it comes in, because you have to see how many classes are going to be appropriate for the data set you are working on. If you go for a high number of classes, so let's say you decided I'm going to go with 10 classes or 15 classes, but then you end up with a bunch of zeros in your data set, then that means you have spread out your data too much. You have way too many classes in there, so you want to reduce the number. Now, if you reduce the number and then you see your data is too condensed, your frequency is coming out to be too large, then that means your data is too squished together, then that means you want to spread out. So for now, I'm going to show you just, what happens if we say, I'm going to pick 5 classes. So now we need to decide what our class width is going to be. And this calculation is where you take your range and you divide it by your number of classes. So our range is 28, and we're going to divide it by our number of classes. And you can see this number comes out to be 5.6. When you are working with the class width, guys, you will see in the little parentheses at the bottom, it says always round up the class width. So you're not using traditional rounding techniques where it's 0.5 or higher, you round up, and if it's 0.4 or lower, you round down. With the class width, even if I had ended up with 5.1, you would have still rounded up. We always round up when you're talking about a class width. So since you have 5 point something, this is going to round up to 6. You can actually also use a built-in function, which is the roundup function over here. So that way, automatically, when you come up with this calculation here, it will round up automatically for you. So again, like I said, use the built-in functions that Excel or Google Sheets have to simplify some of those calculations for yourself. All right, so I need you guys to tell me, and you can just do in chat, what your range came out to be and how many classes are you going with initially. So just in your chat, you can share the range and number of classes, so I can kind of get an idea of what your set is looking like. And then I'll show you how to come up with your class limits in the frequency distribution. Okay, so George, you're going with 5. And just from having used this data set several times, the ideal number can be anywhere for your number of classes, can be 5, 6, or 7. Sometimes 7 seems to work out a little bit better than 5. So like I said, that could be a little bit of a trial and error that we kind of have to figure out. Right now, we're just starting with 5 just to see what kind of data we're going to have. And then based on that, we can change the number. And I'll definitely show you how to do that. All right, so I'm seeing George's answer. What about the rest of you? What is your range and how many number of classes did you go with? And if you use the minimum and maximum functions to find your lowest and highest data values, then you don't have to worry about sorting your data, from smallest to largest, and then trying to do that visually, though it does help, especially once we start doing our frequency distribution. You will see how that kind of comes in handy when we work through that. But before we can get that, we need to decide what our class width is going to be. And that's what I'm hoping once you guys share. So like George had a range of 37 and he's going with the number of classes with 5. So when you divide that, you end up getting 7.4, which means rounded up, that's going to be a class width of 8. Okay, are you guys having trouble with something? Because I'm not seeing any answers coming through. Okay, talk to me, tell me what's going on, because if you need help, it shouldn't be taking you that long to come up with, those 5 values over there. Okay, and then Betty Jo, how many classes are you going to start out with initially? What kind of number are you thinking? So you don't want to go below 5. You want to stay at a minimum of 5. Like I said, 5, 6, or 7 are usually a good place to start out with. So 4 will be too small. Okay, Alexandra, Haley, Kyra, what are you guys coming up with? Okay, and how many classes are you going with, Haley? Okay, Betty Jo, you're going to do 8 classes. Okay, so go ahead and calculate your class width now that you have your range and how many classes you're going with. Haley, you're doing 5 classes. Okay, so go ahead and calculate your class width. And then Alexandra and Kyra, what are you guys coming up with? All right, wonderful. Very nice, Haley. Well, Haley, you have a range of 34 and you're dividing it by 5. So yeah, 6.8 rounded to 7. That looks good. And then of course, Betty Jo, since you did 32, you had 32 as your range and you're going for 8 classes, then that will of course give you 4 as your class width, right? Because you're just staying with multiples of 4 over there. All right, Kyra, Alexandra, what do you guys have for your range and number of classes?
Sorry, it logged me out of like my whole Ames thing and it's telling me to like redo my password, but it's like not letting me. So I'm trying to like do that really quick. Sorry.
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, Alexandra, what are you coming up with for your range and number of classes?
I'm in the process of doing it. My laptop keeps going, it like keeps turning black every time I try to switch over.
Oh, are you using a Chromebook by any chance?
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay, because I know sometimes Chromebook can act funny with when Zoom is in session.
Yeah, it tends to act a lot slower, which is why I'm not sure why, but
Okay.
um,
Well, share with me those values as soon as you have those calculations, but I will go ahead and move forward because we do need to take some time with the other calculations here. So now once you are done with this initial setup over here, guys, then what you're going to do is start working on your frequency distribution table next, which is what you're seeing on the right-hand side over here. So when you're starting with your very first class, and you will see this is broken up into, two parts, that first column, because you have a lower limit and you have an upper limit for each class. So when you're starting out with your very first class, you actually use your lowest data value as a starting point. Now, sometimes you will see that people will go maybe a number smaller than your lowest data value, but even if you start right at the lowest data value, that's always a good starting point, because we want to make sure all the numbers from 102 to 130 get accounted for in our frequency distribution. You don't want to leave any of those numbers out. So starting at 102, or whatever your lowest data value is going to be, is a good place to start. Now, once you come up with that lower limit for your very first class, what we're going to do is use the class width and go ahead and get all the lower limits for our 5 classes that we are designing. Now, if you're doing more than 5 classes, then, of course, that's how many you are going to be coming up with. So the way this works is you take your lower class limit from the previous class, and to that, you are going to add up your class width, the rounded up number that you have. And since I want to use Google or Excel to do the calculation for me, since that number 6 is always going to stay the same, I'm actually going to put $ around that cell value. So that way, when I copy my formula over, the spot for number 6 is always going to stay static. It's not going to change. However, the class limit is going to keep changing as I go down from one row to the other. So basically 102 plus 6, we know, should come out to be 108. So this gives me the lower class limit for my second class. Then I'm going to take 108 and add that class width of 6 again to it. So of course, 108 plus 6 will end up giving us, what is that, 114? But you can see, since I put that dollar symbol around my cell for number 6, every time I copy the cell over, that cell F7 is going to stay the same, and that's because of that dollar symbol I put in there. But my, the cell H5 is also always going to change. So it's H5 here, H4 over here, and then this one was just copied over from the lowest one. So we need to do this for 5 cells. So you can see I'm going to go down and do 5 rows of this. And that's going to give me till 126. Now, the other thing you can actually do is do this for 1 extra cell. And even though we're not really going to be using this cell over here, I'll show you why I'm doing, a 6th class. We're technically not going to be do that. Now, another thing you will read when you do your notes for chapter 2 is, now when you're designing these frequency distribution tables with classes, there cannot be an overlap with the upper class limit and then the lower class limit for the next category. So you cannot end your first class at 108, because if you have the specific number 108 in your data, well, do you put it in the first class or the second class? So you want to avoid any overlap between the upper class limit for the previous class and the lower class limit for the second one, or the next one. So this one will actually end at 107. Now you can put a formula in here, or you can just type the number in there. It really doesn't matter. I kind of just tend to use formulas. So I would use the same formula that I did for my my lower class limit, except this time I am going to subtract 1 from it. And I don't want to do the autofill. So you can see this one ends at 107. Since this guy starts at 114, this has to end at 1 level less than that. So this should end at 113. And I will need to change this cell because it's using, the 130 instead of what I have in the column. So this should be 113 here. The next one is starting at 120, so this guy should end at 119. The next one is starting at 126, so this should end at 125. Technically, the next one is starting at 132, so this should end at 131. And that's the only reason why we did this, so we could see where this class would end. We don't really need a sixth class because we are only doing 5 classes over here. So you can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Now I know Betty Jo, you did 8 classes, so you should have 8 rows in your table with a width of 4 as you go forward. And then it looks like most of you had actually done 5 classes, so you should be about the same as I have, except your data numbers will be different than mine. Now, when you are doing frequency, there is actually a built-in frequency function, but I've had a little bit of trouble working with it. And honestly, I'll tell you, after my first try, I kind of gave up on it. So all I do is I look at my class limits, and you can see we're going from 102 to 107. So I go to this sheet that I had, and I just count the numbers from 102 to 107. And you will see from 102 to 107, we only have 2 data values in here. So that will give me a frequency of 2. For that range of values from 102 to 107, then you're going from 108 to 113. So 108 to 113 will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can see these 5 data values are going to be next. So that will give us a frequency of 5. Then you are going to the third class, which is going from 114 to 119. So 114 to 119, that will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we've got 7 data values in that range. Then you are going from 120 to 125. So 120, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that's to 125. So we've got 6 data values here, and I just make them bold so that way I know I've already counted them. And then the last category is going from 126 to 131. And you know, as I was saying, as long as your highest data value is included in that last class, you are good to go. If that highest data value and the lowest data value don't make within your class limits, then you definitely have to change your number of classes. Now for number, this last one, we have 126 to 131. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So the last 4. And if we did this correctly, then our total value, which you can use the sum function, remember you had 2 years worth of data, that's 24 months. So this frequency column should add up to 24. And if you've done your table correctly, you know, that total should come out to be 24. So that's a great way to check and see that, you know, your frequency is adding up like it should. Now, as you can see, some of our categories are really heavy because you have 5, 7, 6, for that matter, 4 in there. So for this data, it might actually be better to spread it out a little. And, you know, we could almost do 7 classes in here and try and change that up a little bit and, you know, kind of spread our data out a bit. So if you did 7, you will see how my class limits ended up changing. And this was because I used the cells themselves to do the calculation for me instead of doing them myself. So now you can see 28 divided by 7 will give us a class width of 4. And, you know, of course, it's a whole number, so rounded up again, it is still going to be 4. So you've got your 102 again kept as my starting point, and now you're adding 4 as you move forward, but now we need to add 2 more classes since we are going to 7 classes over here, which means we need to, you know, increase both our lower and upper limits. But it looks like when I do 7 classes, I'm only going up to 129, which means this 130 is actually getting left out. So you can see that will not work because we have to have 130 in there. So we could then say, okay, maybe what if we change this to 6 classes? Will that help us? And if we did 6 classes, you can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then the last one is going from 127 to 131. So we're definitely including the 130 in there. But that means we will then have to change our frequencies over here since we've redone our class limit. So you're going from 102 to 106. So go back up. Which will, it's still the same. So it's still going to be those 2 categories, 102, 105. So that's a frequency of 2. Then 107 to 111. So 107 to 111 would again be just these 2 numbers. So that's a frequency of 2. And you can see now, this was a 5 before, but now where we've changed our classes, you know, the numbers are going down. Now you're going from 112 to 116. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 117 to 121. So 117 to 121, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, what were those numbers? 122 to 126. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you can see we're still pretty heavy on some of these, but you know, it should be spread out just a little bit more than what we had previously. And then the last one was 127 to 131. So that will be 1, 2, 3. And you can see this should still add up to 24. But you can see it's a little bit spread out. I mean, it's still kind of concentrated at the 6, 5, and 6 frequencies for those middle numbers. So we could technically go up to 8 classes in this also and try and get, you know, a little bit more spread. So that's kind of what I'm talking about when I say you have to choose your own, you know, number of classes, because your data is going to tell you how many classes you should have. So Alexandra, I see your numbers in here. So you had 38 for your range and you're going with 6 classes. So that should help you calculate your class width then. Alrighty, does anybody know how you are supposed to calculate the relative frequency after you have worked on your frequency column? So relative frequency is technically a percentage calculation. And if you guys, you know, just think about how you calculate percentages, that's the same thing that's going to happen here. So since we're talking about relative frequency, what you have to do is take your frequency for each class that you have and divide it by the total number of your frequencies, right? Because that's how we calculate percentage. So once you have come up with your number of columns, and like I said, just looking at my frequency here, I'd probably go to 8 because we know 7 did not work out for us. So 8 would probably be a better number to work with over here. But, you know, for the sake of time, I'm not going to do that right now because I do want to show you how to do some of the other stuff in here. So for your relative frequency, you take the frequency for that class and you divide it by the total of your frequency column, which of course is 24 in this case. Now, since that total of 24 is going to stay same for all our frequency calculations, I'm again going to put dollar symbols around that cell. So that way I know my 24 will always stay the same. And here we can actually do autofill because it will take the calculations, you know, this frequency next to it divided by the total. So you can see that for all of these calculations, it takes the frequency for that class and divides it by the total. And I've kind of left it open so you can see it's showing you far more decimal places than it should. Now, the way frequency relative frequency works is, again, when you go ahead and add this, it should come close to 1 or at least 0.999999, if it's a rounded answer. But the idea is, because you're taking the entire data set and calculating its relative frequency, it should always add up to 1. Like I said, if it's a rounded number, then 0.99999, but it should still be close to that number of 1. So you can see, once you set up your initial part, calculating the frequency and relative frequency is not going to take a long time. If you look in the notes, they even talk about how sometimes they use, the tally system to come up with, how many values are going to be between 102, 106. But I find that if you just sort out your list from smallest to largest, then it becomes fairly simple to calculate your frequency, because you're just looking at what my lower and upper limit is. And then based on that, count how many of your numbers fall into that category. And you are only working with 24 values over here. So your data set is not large where you have to worry about, how I'm going to keep track of anything. So it becomes fairly easy to do the frequency part of it by hand. So when you guys are working through this, make sure your frequency column is adding up to 24, because all of you are also doing 2 years worth of data. So that number should be the same. And then your relative frequency has to add up to 1. And if you use the built-in calculator for, Google Sheets or Excel, then you don't have to worry about rounding errors and, any of that, because then automatically the Google Sheet will take care of all of those calculations for you. Now, graphing is a little bit different. It starts out in the same way, but it's going to be a little bit different for both Excel and Google Sheets. And I have included tips for graphing, or just how to use Excel and Google Sheets. So if you go under course information and then go under technology resources, so you will see I've included several different links over here. So just a basic training for Excel, the list of functions that are available in Excel and Google Sheets, how to create a histogram, which is what you guys will be doing for this in Excel, and how to make a histogram in Google Sheets. So you do have those links over here, and then just general help with different charts and graphs over here. We're not going to be using StatCrunch till later in this class, not till I think chapter 10 or so. So I'm not going to worry about that, but you do have the help feature for it available. So as you can see, once you are done with your frequency distribution and the relative frequency distribution, which, as you can see, I've included that as just one chart instead of doing them separately. Then you are going to get into your histograms, and you will have 2 of them, one based on the frequency distribution and one based on the relative frequency distribution. So you will be creating those 2 graphs over here separately. Now, for this, I would probably recommend creating a little bit of a different table, because I'm not sure it's going to recognize this. If we just did this one, I don't think it actually gives you a proper graph, but you have insert chart option available right here in your menu options here, or you can go under the insert and click on chart from there also. So you do have a couple different ways where you can go ahead and create it. Now, this is the default it's showing, and this is incorrect, because you should not have 2 different types of columns in here. There should only be 1 single column. So that is something that you are going to have to modify to create. And that's why I was saying you kind of have to rearrange that table a little bit to try and get a proper graph. And that is something you guys can look through those links on how to work through the step-by-step process of creating a histogram, either in Excel or Google Sheets. And then you have the customize button over here where it lets you put a title on your graph, label your X and Y axes, make sure it's kind of labeled correctly, and those kind of things. Because you are, again, doing this as professionally as you possibly can. So you want to make sure, both your X and Y axes have a label on it. Your graph should have a title on it. As you can see, these frequencies on the left-hand side are incorrect because it's using a whole different number over here. So those are the kind of things that I want you to make sure you are fixing that and, working on it correctly. So just doing insert chart is not going to be enough. You are going to have to clean it up and make it look like what a histogram should look like. Now, traditionally in a histogram, you're not supposed to have gaps between your columns, but if I remember this correctly, I think Google always puts gaps in between your columns, and that's okay. So don't worry about, those gaps in the columns. Just make sure your table and your histogram are showing the right information. So it should reflect what your table has. So that's kind of what, I want you guys to work on as you finish this. So that's the main part. And then once you have your graphing, your histograms done, you will make a comment on the shape of your distribution. So, is it a uniform shape? Is it skewed to the right? Is it skewed to the left? Or are you seeing more of a, bell curve, bell shape in there? So there's all the different shapes of the distribution, which is again part of your handouts that you can look at in your notes. So that will give you an idea of what shape your data is showing. And then after you're done with all of your calculations, you can see there are questions that you are going to be answering later on. So again, you do the spreadsheet with all your calculations, your frequency distributions, your histograms, and then for answering these questions, you are going to be doing a short recording on Flip. Just a quick summary of what you did, what you found out, what your results are telling you, basically what kind of conclusions can you draw from the work that you did? What is it telling you in terms of, the production of candy, basically? What are you seeing? Is the candy production, increasing, or is it staying steady, or is it on the decline? So what did you understand once you took your data and organized it? What information are you able to gather? So there are some, guided questions over here, but make sure you're also sharing your conclusions with me in this video recording. So anybody have trouble coming up with their frequency distribution? And did you guys, after that initial number of classes, do you think you're going to have to change the number of classes that you have? Because like I said, in my example, looking at what my frequency distribution looks like, I am thinking 8 is going to be a better number of classes, which means then I would have to add, what was this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I would have to add 2 more. To try and accommodate this. And now you can see when I'm going to 8 classes, my 130 is included, but now that becomes the lower limit and I'm going to 133. So when I do my frequency distribution over here, obviously my frequency is going to change since I've changed my class limits again. So 102 to 105 is the first one. So that is still 2. You're going from 106 to 109, which in this case, you will now see there's nothing from 106 to 109. This is going to be 0. And this is kind of what I was mentioning before. If you end up with too many zeros, and I would say 1 0 is okay, you probably don't want to have 2 classes with zeros or more in there, because then that's too far out, spread out. Then you're going from 110 to 113. So that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 114 to 117. So that's going to be 1, 2, 3. So you can see, you know, again, at this point, we are looking okay, but let's see what the last 4 look like. So you're going from 118 to 121. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 22 to 25. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 again. 126 to 129. 1, 2, 3. So 3 in that one and 1 in the last one. And then of course I'll need to change my sum over here, which should be going to 11 now. And same thing here, this guy should be going to 11. So this one again, you know, just a little bit more spread out, but you know, again, I think this is looking fairly okay. You do have a 0 in there. If you want to avoid the 0 completely, then you would have to go back down to 6, because remember 7, we were missing 130 from our calculation. So 7 was not going to be an appropriate number of classes. We do want to make sure everything from 102 to 130 is being included. So we definitely don't want to leave any of our data values out. And that's what, you know, 7 classes was doing, because remember with 7 classes, we were only going up to 129 instead of 130. So 7 classes was not going to be enough. So you can kind of play around with the different number of classes and see what your data table looks like. You know, are you happy with the way it's coming out to be? And if you are, then, you know, make that decision and say, you know what, I'm going to stay with the number of classes that I have. If you think you need to, you know, spread it out more or condense it more, then you will need to change your number of classes. Don't have too many zeros in there. I'll say that again. 1 0 is okay in your frequency column, probably not more than 1, because we don't have a large enough data set that we can accommodate, you know, multiple zeros in our frequency distribution. So any kind of questions coming up as you're kind of thinking about this assignment here, guys? All right, so what you're seeing at your end for your frequency distribution table, are you guys happy with the number of classes you chose? Or did any of you think about maybe I need to change that, increase it? Not right now? Okay. Alrighty, and again, one final reminder, please make sure you are sending me an email to request your password for this week. Please don't forget about that, and don't wait till Friday evening or, you know, the weekend to request that, because you won't get a reply back till Monday morning. So just go ahead and take a second right now and just send me a quick email requesting your password for this week, okay? All right, guys, so you are working on the candy production. Make sure you finish your discussion post for this week, and then the chapter 2 assignments in my stat lab. Now, next week, we are going to get into chapter 3, which is going to be where we start talking about averages and then variation and standard deviation. So you will have a different assignment for next week. But, you know, if you run into any concerns, any issues this week with chapter 2 and these assignments, shoot me an email, or I will have office hours later this afternoon if you guys need any extra help on that, okay? All right, guys, have a wonderful morning, and I will see you next week on Wednesday. So take care, guys, be safe, and good luck. Take care, everyone. Be careful.